Wielding a machete, this is an agent of the British state.
Ultimately, this position within the security services was used to terrorise me.
A violent MI5 agent who was able to exploit his position despite a long history of abuse.
He said he would be able to kill me and my daughter too.
But the abuser, a threat to women and children, can't be named. Following an unprecedented legal case involving secret hearings, the government succeeded in keeping his identity hidden from the public. This is the story the government tried to stop. Beth, not her real name, is British. She met her ex-partner abroad and they lived together in the UK. The relationship became progressively more abusive.
There was so much psychological terror from him to me that ultimately culminated in me having a breakdown because I was so afraid of everything, because of how he'd made me think, the people that he was involved with and the people who he worked for.
He told her he was informing on networks of right-wing extremists.
He said he worked for the security services.
But the role was abused.
Ultimately, this position within the security services was used to terrorise me because it meant that I couldn't speak out about any of his behaviour towards me, because he had men in high places who always had his back, who would intervene and who would actively kill me if I spoke out.
Is that what he said?
That's what I believed, and that's what he said.
The security service runs agents in terrorist networks, informants who secretly work with MI5 officers, their handlers. Controversial powers let MI5 authorise its agents to commit crimes as part of their cover, but only to access life-saving intelligence, disrupt more serious crime, or ensure an agent's safety. Violence and coercive control in private, domestic abuse are different.
He had complete control. I was a shadow of who I am now. At the end of the relationship, he dictated my every waking hour. Where I went, who I saw, how I worked, what I did at work, and what I wore.
Beth says his extremist mindset wasn't an act, and that he spoke about wanting to carry out an act of terrorist mass murder. He's also a threat to children.
He told me he had sexual fantasies about children, lots of different children, and he had paedophilic literature and that I believed he would act on it. I was absolutely horrified. I didn't dare report him because the police would always be on his side. That's what he told me.
His mistreatment of Beth included this attack.
I thought I'd better film this, mostly because I felt afraid.
He threatens to kill her and returns with a machete.
And at the point that I say I'm going to call the police, he's punched me in the face and I've fallen. And you can hear me screaming and he tries to stab me repeatedly.
He attacked her again within hours.
He somehow got me onto my knees, much like one of those beheading videos, and held the knife to my throat to try and slit it open. And the only reason he didn't slit it open was because I bit down into the hand that he was holding the knife with.
Weeks later, he referenced the incident, unaware he was being filmed, telling her she might get killed. Asked if he'll do it, he says,
"It was almost me."
He then describes his desire to kill.
"It's constantly in me. This murderous thing is always in me. I always imagine how I bludgeon someone to death. It's always me. It's always been me. I've been doing it since I was like 6. I'm overly aggressive. I know that myself."
Following the attack, police went to their home. The agent was arrested and charged with assaulting her. But officers didn't take a full statement from Beth or obtain the video evidence, so prosecutors immediately dropped the case. The police force concerned and Crown Prosecution Service insist the case was discontinued due to a lack of evidence. Beth says he then appeared back at their property and continued to mistreat her. Within weeks, The agent vanished and she was hospitalised due to a mental breakdown. But extremist material found in the house, including a note he wrote about killing Jewish people, had already generated a police counter-terror investigation. Some of Beth's possessions were also seized by detectives from their home, but returned to a relative months later in an alarming visit by an unidentified stranger. I've established the mystery man didn't work for the police. He was, in fact, an MI5 officer. The counter-terror investigation ended with MI5 being passed the evidence on their man. It was a highly unusual move by MI5, suggesting interference in a criminal inquiry. Police have since refused to investigate his treatment of Beth. Counter-terror police say no criminality was identified during their inquiries, but have apologised for the fact Beth's possessions were not passed directly to her. We've examined his alarming personal behaviour in the UK, which will have been visible to the authorities. The agent joined a dating site looking for women under an extremist alias linked to his MI5 work. Elsewhere, he boasted about sexually exploiting women and expressed approval for a young girl being raped and murdered. But how far back does his mistreatment of women go, and where is he now? We've traced him to another country. After leaving the UK, while still under counter-terror investigation, he began working for a foreign intelligence agency.
Violence. Always violence.
Ruth, not her real name, met him in the foreign country years ago. Their relationship was horrifying.
Then he started to tell me things that no human being would be able to get over, such as swimming in a river of blood, eating children's flesh. I had to listen to this every day. He said he would be able to kill me and my daughter too, and then put our bodies somewhere. And no one would ever know who I am.
Fearing for her life, she was taken to a refuge and spoke to local police.
I was psychologically broken, really broken. The women's shelter ordered an ambulance to bring me to the hospital. I wasn't able to speak that night. I couldn't say a word. I was lying in my bed and I tried to call for my daughter or somebody else, but all I could get out was I couldn't speak.
He left her heavily in debt and seemed to have disappeared. We found he spent years in Britain using her name to hide his real identity while working for MI5.
I think it's not fair and I'm angry. It's crazy for me. I'm very hurt. I feel cheated. You can't have trust. There is no justice.
The agent threatened to kill and sexually abuse young girls known to both Ruth and Beth. The government said it will not comment on security or intelligence, but the court order is aimed at protecting national security and avoiding a real and immediate risk to life, safety and privacy. Last year, Sarah Everard was murdered by a police officer who abused the power of the state. The government has announced an inquiry into her death, saying it will shine a light on the failings that let an officer use his power in such a horrific manner. Warning signs are rarely plainer than the ones we've found, but the same government took us to the High Court, first trying to stop this story ever being broadcast, and then seeking to dramatically limit what we could report. They failed, but we've been legally prevented from naming the agent because of a potential risk to him from other extremists, despite the threat he poses. The government said it was obliged to protect him from harm.
Sisters united will never be defeated.
Violence against women and the state's response to it is one of the issues of our time. Yet the British government has thrown its full weight behind stopping women everywhere being warned about this dangerous abuser. He could now be anywhere and with anyone.
So the report of my son missing. He hasn't been back from school. Right. What's your son's name, please? Ricky. R-I-K-K-I.
6-year-old Ricky Neve never came home. Posed in a star shape, his body was left in the woods.
It's just horrible to think it could happen so close to home.
Anywhere in this country, there are children that are capable of killing other children.
For instance, today's Sun has the headline, "The mean streets where evil breeds."
The way it was portrayed in the paper, I wasn't the greatest mother in the world, but I wasn't the worst.
But things became much worse.
Last night, she was charged with murdering her son. Detectives had questioned her for several hours.
They treat me like nothing on earth. I get panic attacks, I get anxiety.
Now that Ruth Neve has been found not guilty, 2 questions need to be asked. Who killed Ricky, and could his death have been prevented?
27 years after the murder, a breakthrough.
They knew at the start, the evidence was always there.
I was 13, it was 20 years ago, and like I said, without being disrespectful, it was insignificant.
I just didn't think it was ever fair. Why my child? When Ricky died, I died.
At 12:10 today, officers searching an area of scrubland off High Road, Peterborough, discovered the body of a young boy. The child was naked, and although there are no obvious signs of injury, nor at this stage of any sexual interference, I am relatively satisfied that the boy did not die from natural causes. The death of this young child is senseless, apparently motiveless, and has shocked even the most experienced of police officers.
That child was 6-year-old Ricky Neve. He'd left for school and never came home.
He meant the world to me. He was my soulmate. He was my friend, a little chinwagger. He was just beautiful. Smile on his face. Always had a cheeky, chubby face. I just loved him so much, and even thinking about it hurts. I just miss him so much. I just didn't think it was ever fair. Why my child?
Over the years, Ruth Neve has shared her story with us, remembering the last time she saw her son alive.
I woke him up in the morning, and I'd been up all night because my baby had been in hospital the week before, and I just got home. He got ready for school, and I always take him to school. This morning, he actually ran out of the house so quickly. Apparently, he was meant to be stealing some Barbie shoes for his sister. Just assumed he'd gone from school straight to his friends. And I got to about 5 and thought, well, he's never this late.
So the report of my son missing. He hasn't been back from school. Right. Well, I haven't seen him since this morning. Okay. What's your son's name, please? Ricky. R-I-K-K-I.
I was like out of my mind with worry.
What was he wearing? School uniform, white shirt. I don't know. I think a little blue coat. All right then. What I'll do, Ruth, I'll get an officer to come and see you.
I blame myself, and I'll always blame myself. Always. That's what parents do. Take responsibility. I just didn't know what to do with myself. You know, it didn't feel real. It only happens to people on telly.
Ricky had been strangled and stripped. His body was found in the woods near his home, posed in a star shape. Would discrimination and prejudice lead police after the wrong suspect.
"400 calls from the public, nearly all of them from Welland, yet 1 week on, Ricky Neave's killer is still at large."
Welland was the estate in Peterborough where Ricky lived with his mum, stepdad and sisters. It had a reputation for drugs and violence.
There is something of a siege mentality. Several national newspapers in this country have been highly critical of the estate and its residents. For instance, today's Sun has the headline, "The Mean Streets Where Evil Breeds."
We only moved because Dean, my husband at the time, he was getting death threats. So the only place we could have gone to was Peterborough. He knew people on that estate. But I don't know, I didn't know anything about the estate at all. I never had much to do with it. I sort of didn't speak to many people. I only speak to people that my husband spoke to. I didn't mind the kids playing out. I didn't mind that. I had the door left open. I didn't mind that at all. Until it started getting like Ricky getting picked on and stuff like that I had to keep wary of. And I tried so hard to keep him in, but he was just wanted to go out, wanted to play, wanted to do this, wanted to do that. He was such a lovely little boy.
While the boy's killer remains free, fear pervades the estate. Police are convinced someone on the Welland estate knows who the killer is. It was not unusual for him to be away from school and spend time with friends. Neighbours say the 6-year-old was streetwise and sociable.
The unnatural death of any child causes shockwaves over a vast area, and this was no different. There was national, international press coverage. The added dimension in this case is the suspicion that Ricky's death is inextricably linked with where he lived. It's hard to apply for a job, for insurance or credit rating with a Welland address.
In the days that we're talking about, 25% of the tenants on the Welland wanted to move.
John Holditch was a county councillor at the time.
We could not let the properties, the council could not let the properties on the Welland, which didn't do anything for the quality of the community. I was involved with it then in terms of, on the City Council, in terms of the housing situation there. About 700 council houses built altogether, which you just don't do that anymore because it's too much of altogether. And it was an estate which was poorly designed, a lot of escape routes for people that were being mischievous, and a lot of trouble there.
The mayor of Peterborough in 1994 was Bobby Day. She used to live on the Welland estate.
The major problem, youngsters go to a local play centre up to the age of 12. Once they reach the age of 12, they want to be grown up and they kick about the streets. They cause a lot of damage, a lot of vandalism, and they turn into absolute louts.
Could one of those youths be connected to Ricky's death? It's something people began to wonder with the murder of Merseyside toddler James Bulger fresh in their memory.
2 11-year-old boys have been found guilty of abducting and murdering James Bulger.
Suspicion and fear on the Welland estate was rife, and pressure on the police was building.
Anywhere in this country, there are children that are capable of killing other children.
It's just horrible to think it could happen so close to home. I mean, everybody thinks of it happening everywhere else, but never here. And it's just horrible.
It's a case of keeping your children under wraps. It really is. Not letting them go anywhere, not to the shop, not out in the back garden. It's really frightening. It's knocked the stuffing out of me. It really has, living so close to him.
There's been a distinct lack of sympathy on the Welland for the bereaved mother. Amidst the rumour and speculation about her son's death, she's been criticised for allowing him to roam so freely, and because it was 6 o'clock before she reported him missing.
Soon, stories started to emerge in the press about Ruth's treatment of her children. In January 1995, police charged her with neglect.
Dressed in blue denim dungarees, a grey t-shirt and cream zip-up jacket, Ruth Neve sat emotionless next to a woman police officer throughout the 1.5-hour hearing.
The way I treated him was nothing the way it was portrayed in the paper. I wasn't the greatest mother in the world, but I wasn't the worst. And the police made a good... they decided to go into the neglect and cruelty and get all the ridiculous statements from people who wanted to be in the news. You know, I'm not going to be accused of hanging my son over a bridge or choking him half to death or starving him or beating him up or punching him, because it's all wrong.
Things were to get much worse for Ruth Neve.
A small crowd gathered outside Peterborough Magistrates' Court hoping to catch a glimpse of Ruth Neve, but police had taken her there 3 hours earlier. Last night she was charged with murdering her son. Detectives had questioned her for several hours.
That October, Ruth Neve went on trial, the prosecution claiming she murdered her son as part of a black magic ritual.
That kind of stuff tends to stick out in my mind, and it's like a trigger. I get panic attacks, I get anxiety. It's awful. I can never get away from it, really, because of such awful times.
After 4 weeks of evidence, a verdict was reached.
The foreman of the jury said they had decided unanimously Ruth Neve was not guilty of murder, she was not guilty of manslaughter. She broke down and wept. There were gasps of disbelief from the public gallery.
How do you feel about that original police investigation?
Revulsion, to be honest. They treated me like nothing on earth. Horrible people they were.
But she was jailed for neglect. Ruth says she felt she had no other option but to plead guilty. Her daughters were taken into care.
Now that Ruth Neve has been found not guilty of both murder or manslaughter, 2 questions need to be asked. Who killed Ricky, and could his death have been prevented?
5 years later, Ruth left prison and tried to live a quiet life. But with Ricky's murder still unsolved, she couldn't rest. Ruth met Gary Rogers through a friend on a day out at a football club. He's the man she would marry, the man who would painstakingly pore through the old evidence to get to the truth.
I fell in love with somebody and made them a promise. This is all down to Ruth finding somebody she could trust enough to look at it with an open mind, no preconceptions. And I didn't look at it to say, well, I'm going to prove who murdered your son. I said I would help her find truth and justice, and that's what we done. We got to this point today because I worked on evidence. It's 28 years old now. The evidence was always there. It's just the way the police tried to bury it, twist it, and if you imagine like a jigsaw puzzle, they were trying to force pieces of a jigsaw puzzle into places they shouldn't be.
In 2014, 20 years after Ricky's death, Ruth and Gary persuaded the police to reopen the case.
I never set out to solve a murder. Paul Ford asked me if I could give him some fresh, new or compelling evidence. We gave him all 3 fresh, new and compelling evidence. He's the one and his team solved this murder. Not me, I just kept a promise.
In one case, police records showed that Ruth was spotted half a mile from her home the night Ricky disappeared. In actual fact, she was at home at that time, being interviewed by 3 officers.
Ruth Neve is pleased that we're opening the investigation because she wants justice for her son, which is fair, and I think any mother in those circumstances would be the same. But I think it's fair to say as well, from our own perspective, we have to be very, very careful about when and how and the reasons to open this investigation. And from our own minds, objectively, we are satisfied, based on the information that we've reviewed and what we've seen, that there are fresh grounds to open this investigation.
It's never going to be over, not for me, because somebody has took a life of a little boy that was a super duper little chunk amongst, and if there's any prick of conscience of anybody that knows anything, they need to come forward, and I know full well that they will find who done it.
With you for the next hour, this is Crime Watch.
In 2015, the BBC's Crime Watch programme featured Ricky's murder. Advancements in forensic technology meant police were able to digitally recreate the crime scene and take another look at the original evidence. A year after the case was reopened, Cambridgeshire Police identified a suspect, James Watson. He would have been 13 at the time of Ricky's murder.
If I was by myself and shut my eyes, or did you know, when I put my head on my pillow at night time, I can't picture it, I can't record it.
Watson was interviewed by police as a witness back in 1994. But when interviewed again in 2016, his story about seeing Ricky by a building site on the day he disappeared had changed.
I remember bumping into Ricky, having a chat with him, picking up the fence, you know, walking around. And then we left. I was 13, it was 20 years ago, and like I said, without being disrespectful, it was insignificant.
James Watson's claim that he lifted Ricky up to see some diggers over a fence was a lie. In 1994, there was no fence. Police also matched Watson's DNA to samples taken from Ricky's discarded clothing.
More than 2 decades after the schoolboy Ricky Neve was murdered, tonight a man in his 30s is in police custody. That man would have been just a teenager when 6-year-old Ricky disappeared from an estate in Peterborough in 1994.
But there are more twists and turns to come. While on bail, Watson fled to Portugal. Watson was rearrested in Portugal in August 2016 and extradited back to the UK. Initially, the Crown Prosecution Service thought there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. After Ricky's family appealed, Watson was finally charged with murder in 2020. It took another 2 years for his trial to begin at the Old Bailey in London.
The court was told that he was living in a children's home at the time and played truant from school an awful lot. He also dismissed suggestions that he had an unhealthy interest as a child in dead birds and images of young children in their underwear.
After 11 weeks in court, Watson was found guilty.
It brought back memories of when I was in court, because I said to him, there's no way I'm going in court. I do not ever want to step in front of court again because of how I was treated in there and everything else. So, yeah, I had to do it by video link, which was allowed. And he used my neglect and cruelty as his defence, and he thought he could get away with it.
Today we finally secured justice for Ricky and his family, following an almost 30-year battle to find the truth. Nothing can take the pain of this heartbreaking case away. But we hope today's verdict gives Ricky the family the closure they deserve and the answers they've longed for. Our thoughts are very much with them at this time.
I hope it's the end of it for the family. I hope it's the end of it for the city, and certainly for the people that live on Welland. It's got to be a shadow lifted off them, because they don't want people telling them all the time that they're living on a estate where a child was murdered. I think if there had been more multi-agency approach to the family, I think that Ricky might well still be alive today. But it was all down to social services in those days. You really couldn't get other agencies involved.
Now, a man has been sentenced to life with a minimum of 15 years for the murder of 6-year-old Ricky Neve almost 28 years ago. The schoolboy's naked body was found near his home in Peterborough the day after he disappeared in November 1994. James Watson, who's now 41, was found guilty of his murder at the Old Bailey.
Ruth was unable to attend court on medical grounds. But in a statement after the sentence, she told us, "I would like to thank the judge for giving him the maximum allowed sentence. 15 years will never be long enough and will never bring Ricky back. I will fight until my last breath to keep this monster behind bars and the public safe." The monster James Watson not only murdered my precious son Ricky, but set in motion a chain of events that has ruined my life and those of my children. Ricky's murder left a massive hole in our lives and in our hearts. James Watson, you have no idea what you have done. But you do, of course. You are pure evil with no conscience. You never were, nor will you ever be, a match to my Ricky. Ricky's 3 sisters gave statements at the sentencing. Rebecca Harvey, Ricky's eldest sister, told us, "After all these years, Ricky has some justice, and now the person responsible for his murder will finally pay for what he did to all of us." From Rochelle Orr, "As a family, we have suffered, but I hope today's sentencing can give us some closure." Sheridan Orr told us, "I was so young when this happened. I do know it will affect me for the rest of my life."
His memory lives on through his family, who've had to deal with his loss for the rest of their lives. But now they finally know, they have answers. They know what happened, and they know who took Ricky from them. And we really, really hope this gives them some peace. For years, Watson had hidden away, knowing he was responsible for Ricky's murder and thinking he'd gotten away with it. But this is no longer the case. He will spend years behind bars, and the truth is finally out.
It actually fell to you to get this case reopened. We wouldn't be sitting here with what we know now had you not gone through all of that evidence. Are you angry that it fell to you?
In one way, yeah, but not really angry. It surprises me nobody else has done it. But then again, it all comes down to Rue finding somebody that she could trust, that believed her and she trusted. And it just happened to be me coming on.
I love you. I just can't thank you enough for what you've done for me.
Justice for Ricky now turns into justice for Ruth and the fight to clear her name. While she pleaded guilty to neglecting her children, she maintains most of the claims against her were false.
Is there anything Cambridgeshire Police could do now?
Yeah, apologise. Apologising for making my life hell, living under a cloud, everybody thinking I murdered my son. There's nothing left apart from an apology. I say it to Gary, and I don't like saying it to Gary, but I go to Gary, do you know what, if Ricky was alive, obviously I wouldn't be here, I'm saying. I said, but, you know, I'd be a strapping lad, and I'd have all the grandkids and all the girls around me, and, you know, because I always wanted a big family, and I was getting a big family. I had 4 kids, and there was me, obviously, and friends, family and stuff going on, but I missed out on that. I've missed out on my children's upbringing. I've missed out on my grandchildren's upbringings. I'm missing out on everything, thanks to Cambridgeshire Police. I didn't just... When Ricky died, I died.